We take a single episode of a science fiction TV series and overanalyze it to within an inch of its life. This is the Fusion Patrol Podcast. Welcome to the discussion. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Ben.
And tonight we're looking at the Doomwatch episode Train and Detrain, which I'm sure is about science fiction high-speed trains and the problems that are going to come about from that advance in technology. Let's find out, shall we? In a forest in Sussex, the animals are dead, and John Ridge is investigating them. Meanwhile, Toby Wren is put on the job of finding out if there are any new pesticides that have been released by British companies. At a British pesticide company, Chief Chemist Ellis is being given some unusual hints. His parking spot is removed. He gets a new secretary without warning. They remove the carpet from his office. His phone disappears, and the head of the company is avoiding talking to him. Whatever could it mean? When Toby Wren visits the company, he overhears what they're doing to Chief Chemist Ellis. It seems that they're trying to give him a hint that they want him to leave. Instead, since he has a contract, they transfer him to a new job, a lesser job. This doesn't sit well with Toby. Ellis happens to be his former tutor at Cambridge, a man that he has great respect and fondness for. This also means that Toby takes an instant dislike to the head of the chemical company, Mr. Mitchell. Mitchell doesn't really want to cooperate with him, and he delays turning over samples of their new chemical until after they've already started shipping it. Quist is out of the country, so John Ridge is in charge. Ridge hatches a plan to smuggle Toby into the facility and have him obtain a sample of the chemical surreptitiously. They do this. However, Toby is caught. Toby gives the head of the company a piece of his mind about the way they're treating Ellis, and the head of the company uses a tape recorder to capture Toby's rant. Mitchell then uses the tape to try to leverage Quist, who's now back in the country, into not investigating his pesticide. Quist has no choice but to fire Wren. However, Quist knows that because Mitchell tried to leverage him with the tape, he does have something to hide. Ellis dies. Suicide. Later, both Wren and Mitchell receive copies of Ellis's suicide note. While Mitchell destroys his copy, Wren uses it to confront him, forces him to admit that he forced Ellis to perform unauthorized tests that Ellis had objected to. Mitchell is forced to cooperate, and he gives back the tape to Wren. There is justice in the world, as soon after, Mitchell loses his parking spot and isn't invited to important meetings. The D-train leaves at noon. You know, when I watched this episode, I suddenly remembered what it was that had happened when we were watching Doomwatch before, and I thought, maybe we won't go all the way through with this. And that was, there's not a whole lot of sci-fi in this.
Thank you for saying that. In fact, I actually found this episode to be rather boring. It was just bureaucratic nonsense.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, and so this may be a short one. I don't know. You know, obviously, we're still in the range of what Doomwatch is doing. And I suppose that, you know, episode after episode after episode, it could just be company comes out with new chemical, company does some dodgy testing, company wants to get the chemical out and not be bothered by regulators, and Doomwatch saves the day over and over and again. And I don't think it is, but that made that bit of this plot was very just ordinary sort of government procedural sort of TV. And I don't think really if you tried to put yourself in 1972, it was any different then. It's like, ooh, big chemical, you know, maybe that was a lot fresher in the mind of the public. I mean, now we just automatically assume that all companies do this. Maybe in the 1970s, early 70s, maybe we weren't as jaded. And maybe this was, you know, ooh, would they do that? Ooh, how terrible. This is a doomsday scenario. But I didn't get it. So I don't know.
I didn't feel it at all.
Yeah. So what I found very interesting was that to me, it seemed like, what would you guess? 80% of the episode had to do with a pesticide?
Well, if we're going to get into the plot, the plot element itself, then yeah, it has to do with the pesticide. But Really, I thought this really felt more like just a character study of Toby.
Yes, I think there's a lot of that. But what I thought was interesting was the name of the episode, Train and
Detrain. Yeah,
which is
it's
about the
very
20%
deceiving.
of about the 20% of the non-main plot.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how they treat the old chemist. And I have
And to be honest, I actually thought it was going to have something to do with trains. I really did. The way you described it in your synopsis, because obviously I've never seen this before.
Yeah, me neither.
So I had no idea what to expect. I hadn't even read the synopsis. So I literally went into this thinking that this got something to do, much like the last episode has something to do with this engine that was creating wreaking havoc with
the red. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought we're going to have something like that. Now we've got this train that either through its power source or maybe it's waste, waste exhaust.
Atomic coast-to-coast train, train.
Yeah, something like that.
Where have I heard that idea before?
I haven't, can't imagine. I honestly thought that that's what we were going to be dealing with. And when I saw how the phrase train and detrain was used in this episode, I thought, oh, okay, that's clever. Should I be impressed or not? I haven't decided yet.
Yeah, and of course, it's never a term I've heard before.
Not used in that respect. No, obviously train, yes, but detrain, no. I've never heard that phrase used before. I'm just accepting it on face value that that's what it means, maybe over across the pond.
And of course, they're implying that that's what it means across the pond on this side. That's what the Americans do.
That is true.
So I don't know. I did a little.
Well, I don't think it's a question of the phrase. I think it's more a matter of the policy about busting people down.
Yeah.
But not the phrase. I think the phrase sounds uniquely British, but that I could be way wrong.
Yeah, I know. We'd come up with something much more, a lot more syllables, honestly. It's like elevator versus lift.
Yeah.
We like those complicated sounds and stuff. Yeah, the premise of Doomwatch is always painted as being, cautionary tale about the progress, quote unquote, progress, and what we're willing to do for it and go. And you could look at this and say, we're talking about the pesticides, but we're not. This episode is talking about the influence of American ideas on the British way of life. This American company has come in and bought this pesticide company. They've instituted these new management techniques. They've put pressure on them to perform, and so they're having to behave in a criminal fashion to keep up with their American masters' expectations with the tests and getting information out, and then also with the treatment of elderly workers, and a topic that you and I, looking at this episode, can say, yeah, we're in that age.
That's true. And I will agree that topic, or at least that particular story point, that bullet point of the episode did resonate within me for that very reason.
So I did a little research, very little research, but I did a little research. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967 in the United States. Now, this is an act that prohibited some form of discrimination for workers over the age of 40. And I think it's interesting that they actually mentioned that age in this episode. Thinking, America, age 40, you'd be out of here. So I wish we had somebody who was, well, heck, we're not old enough, right? I mean, we're old enough now, but in 1970...
Oh, clearly not. At that time, no.
You and I would have no concept of the idea of how older workers in the United States were treated.
No, of course not.
And we would also have no idea how older workers were being treated in the UK.
No, definitely not.
Maybe they didn't do that to them. Maybe they weren't complete jerks to them and say, no, young youth. I mean, that is kind of an American stereotype in British stuff about how we covet youth and how we, turn over things new, whereas Britain is old and staid. And so you get people like Captain Peacock, Are You Being Served and whatnot, where you just rise up through the ranks and you just keep getting older and older and seniority counts for something. Whereas in the United States, it's like, get them out of here, new, fresh ideas, chuck them out on the bin. So I'm wondering if this is truly in response to an actual influx at that time of that American attitude.
It's possible. I think by that point, we were definitely, our American corporate interests were definitely going across the ocean at that particular time. So it's very possible that maybe there was some kind of an influence being felt over in the UK, and it became a talking point.
Yeah. So that if that was the bugbear that the author wanted to expose, because Doomwatch is a show about exposing the dangers of progress. Call it progress, but change.
And usually that's in some sort of a science fiction element, and now it's more of a social one.
They pushed social, and so what they had to do was they had to go, well, how would Doomwatch get involved with this? We're gonna have to frame a story that would get them involved for some way. And so that's why the whole chemical story seems so periphery in this, even though it dominates the entire thing. And I think that makes this, I want to say, an unsuccessful episode. But at the same time, if I were living at that time and I was over the age of 40, I would watch this and I would have concerns,
I suppose back then
it would make me think.
I'm sure it would.
Older workers still, to this day, have discrimination against them, even though there's, multiple more laws against discrimination that have come on the books since
But it
then.
still exists.
It still absolutely exists.
Yes, of course.
If I couldn't go out and get another job in IT, I don't think. With 30 plus years of high level experience, I
understand.
It wouldn't happen.
I've been working in healthcare for God knows how many years. Same thing with Keith. And at our age, if we were to successfully find another job, it would be at a fraction of what we're making now.
Yeah. And they would obviously want to hire younger people.
Of course.
Because they pay less.
Precisely.
So, I mean, I wonder if is it the age or is it the pay? I mean, okay, it could be both. But
I think it's both.
I
think, it depends on circumstances. I mean, I lost out on a possible promotion earlier this year within my company because of my salary of where I'm at right now. They had one position open, and instead they hired somebody from off the street. And I found out it was because they could start that person off at a much lower rate than, promoting me up, because I've been with the company for, oh, good grief. I was hired 2005 here, and then that was 2018. So I've been with the company for 13 years. So my salary's pretty good. Mm-hmm. And if I had gotten that job, they would have had to increase it. However, keeping me where I'm at and bringing somebody fresh off the street allows them to save money.
And there's something to be said for, and I'm trying to be fair on both sides of this issue. I'm set in my ways. I know it.
Mm-hmm. Flexibility, teachability.
You can look at this two ways. I have a ton of practical experience. I've seen things go wrong more ways than you can imagine. So when I see a project, I immediately eliminate so many avenues that you might explore because, I've seen that fail before.
Mm-hmm.
And a younger person with less experience could come in, less practical experience, could come in and go, well, let's give that a try. And they might make it work because, no ideas. Well, there are ideas that are completely unworkable, but
I agree.
You're going to follow the path of least resistance. And so, I'm not trying to say stuck in my ways in a negative way, but and I think we see that in Ellis here. He wants to do it the right way. He wants to do it the correct way, the way that he knows is right, the way that
he doesn't want to take. Yeah, he doesn't want to take shortcuts.
And the situation, the management demands that he take shortcuts.
Right.
So, and would the younger guy in his office, would he be willing to do what the boss told him, even if he knew it was wrong?
I get the feeling he would, but he struck me as, a youthful opportunist and maybe it's because he does have that lack of experience that he hasn't built up all these, I don't want to call them safeguards, but this sense of proper procedure. Because that usually comes about when you've been doing the job for a very long time.
Yeah. And there's also there's less fear. When you're new on a job, you get the fear.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how I'm doing. I don't know if I'm doing work that's adequate to the task. I don't know if they like me, even if they give me good reviews. Really, there's always that doubt. After
a little bit of
20
paranoia.
years, you get the feeling it's like, no, I know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
They know I know what I'm doing.
And if you've been promoted, especially when you're kind of young and you get promoted up or brought into a position of some sort of respectability, if the boss tells you to jump, you're not only going to say how high, but you're going to then follow up with, and when may I come down, sir?
Yep. And after a period of time, and I know I've done it, they tell you something, you ask questions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've reached that point too in my own job.
What about this?
Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah, I've done that. And I think you're right. That's a very good point as far as this episode goes, that we're now seeing that little morality play at work here.
So, I mean, there are interesting ideas in the story. They're just not necessarily science fiction ideas. And
no, it's more for just a standard old drama.
Yeah. But I guess that's the flexibility of this framework. I mean, I'm hoping to see more anthropomorphic rats in the future. I definitely hoping I see more anthropomorphic rats in the future. But today we just didn't get that. So I got a few notes. Tried to come up with some stuff that just wanted to put out there. Starting with, in big print, the hilarious dead squirrel.
Oh, yeah. It looked like a cardboard cutout at first. I was like, wow, could that be any more? I mean, oh, yeah, now the animals are dying and they're being petrified at the same time.
Yeah, that part
Instant rigor mortis.
That part was kind of weird because I think that...
There's your science fiction.
Was a stuffed squirrel holding a nut, right?
Yeah.
So he actually died and froze in spot, eating a nut. And then when the kid goes up, it like falls out like a brick. Plop. Like, I thought that was going to be the cool part. Like, this is going to be some cool science fiction killer that freezes you in situ. And then it's like, yeah, there's going to be dead people in a cottage somewhere. But no, right? We get the dead animals out of the way and then it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about it being a character study for Toby Wren.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Toby is the youngest member of the team. At least he's the newest member of the team, which is also kind of interesting now that we think about it. Since this is talking about people who've been on the job a long time. There's a scene where he comes in at the very beginning. Ridge is looking at bags of dead animals, and Toby comes in, talks to Bradley, and he says, it's got to be a new pesticide. And Bradley's like, well, I prefer to wait until we get the evidence. Right? There is the difference between young and brash.
Yeah.
And
now, yeah, we see it the other way around now.
And we see what's wrong with, frankly, Toby's wrong. I mean, he's right, but he's wrong.
He's not right in the way that he thinks he is.
Yeah. And Bradley is correct that we should collect the evidence and continue on.
Mm-hmm.
That's the methodological way. Let's talk about the technique that the chemical company used to try to get rid of Ellis.
Oh, intimidation of sorts.
Yeah. They removed the carpet in his office.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good one.
They changed his secretary without any warning.
Mm-hmm.
They removed his phone. They reassigned his parking spot without telling him.
This I thought was interesting. Now, I would point out that the first thought, I had two thoughts that ran through my head almost simultaneously. The first thought that ran through my head was, I got the feeling that they were trying to discourage him to the point of saying, I'm out of here.
Yes.
The second thought that followed up almost immediately was, I have never heard of this technique before.
Not to this extreme.
Not to this. No, I haven't heard of anything like this. Not like this.
I mean, you can give them really cruddy jobs, and you can assign work to them that they don't want to do, and it's beneath them or things like that. But yeah, I've never heard anything like this. I almost thought in my, hey, this has got to be science fiction. I almost thought that maybe everyone had forgotten.
Yeah, I will admit. Okay,
that it was
thank
like
you.
A parallel
Actually,
universe thing.
That was a third thought that did come in at some point later on, and I think that happened with the phone when he goes in there and notices that his phone is gone. and he goes out to complain, and it's like, and I thought, it is. I will admit, at one point I thought parallel universe, and then I completely threw that out because then I realized how would that even fit into this? Yeah, you've got a pesticide that's creating dimensional portals, of course. But then I thought, well, maybe it's making everybody forget. That I thought might work, but darn, no.
Yeah. Except, the guy should have, if that had been the case, then the guy that was in his spot wouldn't have known him. But, it's like, this is weird. Okay. Yeah, I would be, of all the things that they did, right? If they took my carpet, thinking about my office that I used to have, if they took my carpet, I'd be like, why did you take my carpet? But I don't care. I don't spend a lot of time on the carpet. Some days at lunch, perhaps I'd lie down on the floor and turn the lights off in my office and relax.
Well, yeah, carpet did seem like a really ridiculously trivial thing.
It costs money to send someone in and remove
and rip
carpet,
it up. Yeah.
right? They took his phone away. If someone had come into my office and taken my phone away, I'd have done a dance. Right? Like, okay, happy days. I can send email. Of course, they didn't have that option, but he has a secretary out there. Even if it's not the same secretary, he's got a secretary. Call him up and tell him that they can't run this experiment or whatever it happens to be. So I'd have been happy as a clam. Later on in the episode, his wall disappears.
His whole cubicle, yeah.
Think about the
wall.
cost.
Yeah.
Think about the cost of having a crew come in to remove his wall just to give him the hint that we don't want you here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think they figured out how to do this. I think the British have not quite got the hang of how to screw over one of your employees and get them to leave.
Well, they haven't fully embraced all of Western culture. I mean, they still do the worst Western movies imaginable.
That's true. That's absolutely true. But I just don't think this is a cost-effective technique to get rid of the guy. We've already talked about the age 40 in the United States, so I think it's interesting that they mentioned that 40 was the age. Apparently, wow. I look back on when I was 40, and I think I was still in my game at 40.
Oh, I was definitely in mine still. But something else you need to consider, though, and I know that a lot of people, they kind of say, rather glibly about, 50, 60 is the new 50, things like that, how with each successive generation or with today's generation, you can have a better quality of life, even though you're older than, the previous generation. And yeah, there is a lot of glib use with that, but I think that there is some truth. I mean, obviously you had it. I definitely had it in my life. When I was in my 40s, I was extremely productive. In fact, I was, that was among probably my most productive.
Yeah, I think. There's a distinction. So I can say when I was in my 20s, single. At the time, I was working for an insurance company. I was a coder at that point. I was the manager of the IT systems, but I was primarily a coder. And I worked 18 hours a day.
Oh, yeah. I
7 days a week.
I did something similar to that. Back, in my early 40s, I was, let me see, actually, no, more like my, very, very late 30s, extremely late 30s. I was doing 12 hours a day. No, I take that back. I was doing 14 hours a day, Monday through Thursday, and on, something ridiculous, like 18 hours on Friday. And I did that for 3.5 months. And I had all the energy in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of Dr. Pepper out there. And Cheetos. I fueled on Cheetos and Dr. Pepper. I know that's a programmer stereotype, but I absolutely I was at the keyboard all the time, fingers flying, typing away, working at the code. But I know for a fact that whereas I could crank out far more lines of code when I was 20, and what was the point of going home, right? I mean, I had everything I would do at home. If I went home, I'd just be on the computer programming. So work on it. I wasn't getting paid for overtime. I was just
nothing better to do.
I was just dedicated and stupid. And as you get older, you realize it ain't worth it.
Mm-hmm.
You pay me for 8 hours a day, I'll be here 8 hours a day. And I know that sounds like you're being lazy, but it's not. It's the reality of it. They're paying you for 8 hours a day, and you shouldn't be giving them freebies. And of course, that attitude leads to them wanting to get rid of you. If I can find somebody young and stupid who will work 18 hours a day for the same money, why should I pay somebody who's... But I was far more effective. I had far more experience. I had far more ability to see a problem that I'd seen before and crush it.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't look like you're more effective when somebody sees you typing continuously for 18 hours, or they see you thinking for 4 and typing for 4.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, in my case, management loved it. Yeah, I was making overtime, but they loved the dedication. So I got promoted really fast after that.
Oh, yeah. And
it worked for me.
I think, I hate to mention the guy because he's such a jerk, but the Dilbert principle, I think, holds. You will be promoted until you reach the point where you are no longer competent. And then...
Oh, promoted to the level of your incompetence.
Yep.
That's actually a Mark Twain quote, I think, or something to that effect. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I believe it. I've seen it in a lot of places.
Well, I've seen it too. I've seen it where I work.
I'd like to think it didn't happen to me. I got promoted to the point where I was at the end of the career path for, because if you're in IT, there is no path to management. I mean, you can be in IT management, but there's no path to, the management of the business, because the business is about something else. It's not about computers. It's not your area. So I don't know. Anyway, a deviation there, but I think I genuinely think that this episode raised a lot of interesting ideas. I didn't think it was a particularly interesting episode.
If you're looking for a very deep and thoughtful episode, which admittedly some science fiction or speculative fiction is very good at doing, yeah, this did it. But Doom Patrol has been, for the most part, a rather, well, it has had some morality that was stretched to the point of transparency through science fiction. But if you were looking for science fiction entertainment, this was not the episode for it.
No. And I think Doomwatch is at its core, it's a morality play.
Oh yeah, it is. It is.
It's all about Mary Shelley and thinking about the consequences of your actions.
Crashing airplanes by turning rubber into goop.
Actually, I think that's a terrible one. I mean, I really enjoyed that episode, but I think that's a terrible example. That is an incredibly good idea that should be absolutely pursued, right?
Oh, I agree.
You are not going to convince me that was a bad idea. The only thing that you can convince me of is that they really, really needed to be grade A strict in their quarantine and their work. And what they developed needed to be not so virulent, But the Project Sahara
purpose.
episode where they were collecting all the data on people, which was very prescient in the computers for the government databases, that one's about the morality of what you can do with technology. And I think that's absolutely fair. Even though it's dated by today's standards, that's a worthy topic to come up and say, what about this? Look at the people who are what are they called? Bioethicists? The people who are looking at, what are the implications of being able to edit genes in unborn children? There's eliminate genetic defects. How can you argue against that? How can you say that that's a bad thing?
Well, especially if you're looking at, eliminating Down syndrome or any other congenital birth defect that could come. Of course, manipulating the genetics.
But is
pre-birth,
stupid a congenital defect?
No. To fix it, to fix it is a great thing.
Well, no, I mean, the quality of being stupid. Is the quality of stupid a genetic defect? I mean, if you knew the child was going to have the stupid gene, there is a stupid gene, fixing that, improving that. And then there's the question of, well, if you did, I'm grossly oversimplifying this, but let's say you could, there's a gene that you can express, and if you express it at one level, you get a stupid person. If you express it at another level, you get an average person. And if you express it at a higher level, you get an uber genius. Yeah. You look at it and go, oh, I see that your child's going to be 40% lower than the average. So, there's two options. We could fix that, or he might grow up to be president of the United States, because apparently that's what it takes these days. But and then, if I had an average child, would you be tempted to tweak it?
Well, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I can see that.
I absolutely would be tempted to tweak it. And I feel guilty about that. I feel guilty about it. And I don't know why I feel guilty about it, because I guess maybe you might, and I put this to you, you might say, well, God's got a plan, but I don't fall in that camp. There is no plan, so why wouldn't you make the kid the best of the best? 6'8".
Well, that's
ripped,
the really
evangelical, smart.
Yeah, that's the evangelical argument, and I won't even. No, I
pursue that. Not trying to. Not trying to pigeonhole you and say you're an evangelical. I didn't.
No, in fact, actually, I know what you're saying. In fact, I'd actually take the opposite tack on that and say, well, okay. I mean, if we're going to go down that road, I say something to the effect of, God also created science, and we're using science to improve the quality of life. So therefore, God created improve the quality of life. But that's just me.
And this part even sucks more, right? First, you have the ethical question of whether or not you should make your kids smarter. Let's say you should. Then you have the economic issue. Who's going to be able to afford to do that?
That's when, and we've had science fiction movies that have touched on that point.
Would that spread the gap even further? Would you create
eventually? I think it would.
And the Morlocks.
Eventually would. I mean, it's been, we've seen it in Star Trek episodes. There was a movie, 15, 20 years ago that dealt with that, and it's another telling of the haves and have-nots.
So yeah, far cry from this episode, but nonetheless, it brings up those ideas to me, and that's I think sometimes the best television does that, even if I just didn't really care for the episode, and that's really kind of funny. Let's see. We can't pass by without mentioning the fact that Mr. Mitchell receives Ellis's suicide note, and if the man had had a mustache, he would have twirled it moment, because he lit his cigar with it.
Yeah, and smirked. He laughed at it.
Has anyone ever done that in real life? I mean, somebody take a note. And
it was so cliche.
I'm going to light my cigar. A suicide note.
I mean, they really reduced Mitchell into just a caricature by doing that. It was so beyond the pale. But I mean, to what end? I mean, what were they trying to tell us by doing such a thing?
Yeah, I mean, if he had
it was too far. I mean, if they just wanted to let him, or just convey that Mitchell didn't care, or just it was like good riddance to bad rubbish kind of thing. There are so many other things he could have done. He could have just torn it up and thrown it into the garbage.
He could have just burned it.
Yeah.
But fine, if he reached over and burned it and tossed it in the garbage can, it's like, I'm getting rid of the evidence that this ever came in. I'm covering up. I don't think. But by lighting his cigar with it, he's sort of making a metaphor that my success, because for some stupid reason, cigars are seen as a sign of success in television and movies and society.
Mm-hmm.
Fat cats are the ones that smoke cigars, when I think it's just stinky people smoke cigars. But the road to my success is paved over the dead torture and misery of this poor man that I drove to death. And he can't make any other conclusion than he drove him to die. So, yeah, Mitchell is quite a piece of work. Yeah, I didn't particularly like that. What I did think was poorly done in the story, if that wasn't considered poorly done. At the end, Mitchell comes in and the chemist dude has his parking spot. Now, first off, I mean, maybe. I think there was a sort of hierarchy at my work where the director got the first spot because I guess they're too lazy to walk as far. I'm guessing that's what it is.
Oh, yeah.
The closer to the door, then the more important you are. And so, but the other guy just got a parking spot. He doesn't need the head guy's parking spot, right? But think about it. He was a junior chemist at the beginning of this episode. He got promoted to senior chemist, presumably not on his merit, but on the fact that he was there and they wanted to bump Ellis out. And now looks like he's being promoted to Mitchell's job at the end of this. Is he even qualified for Mitchell's job?
Probably not.
I don't think Mitchell's a chemist, right? I mean, he's management type.
Right.
It's just like I was saying, in my work, you get, if I were a chemist, chief chemist is as far as you're going to go in that company. You're not going to move over into finance. You're not going to move over into the legal department. You're not going to move over into upper management. That's people whose job it is to run a company and drive a business and make contracts and deals and get supply chains working, and not a head chemist. And it's a mistake. And there is the Dilbert principle in action. If you did promote the chief chemist to be the CIO or whatever, or CEO of the corporation, you would have promoted him into a position he's not qualified for. You would hit his point of incompetence at that point.
You're right, but that's something that
it's definitely what they imply in this episode.
Yeah, but is that another indictment against the American business model?
I think a lot of this is an indictment against the American business model, because doing the tests surreptitiously seems to be something that the Americans expected them to do. Stonewalling the regulatory agency seems to be something that the Americans want them to do, or at least it's Mitchell's interpretation of what the Americans want them to do. So, yeah, this is a very anti-American show. I think, and I would, could you even do this episode now? I mean, obviously the whole pesticide killing thing. Sure, we're still doing that. Is this the way age discrimination works now? I hope not.
I hope not. No,
I hope not. Anyway, that's all I got.
I don't have anything else.
That's all I got. So I mean that does kind of make it short. But then, hey, we're not beholden. We can make these as short as we want to. I don't know what the next episode of Doomwatch is off the top of my head. So you'll just have to look at the list of episodes that are out there and look it up and find out for next time. But we are at the very least, we're going to clear out through series 1 of Doomwatch. And then, who knows? I don't know. It's going to depend on how it goes. I mean, if they're all not science fiction, we might say...
the episode is You Killed Toby Wren.
That's the next one. I thought there was the battery people.
Well, that's what's showing up on April 1, actually. Maybe. Did I go too far?
I think there's one called The Battery People.
Oh, you're right. Yes, The Battery People. That is next.
See, that sounds like people who've been fitted with electronic prostheses, and now they've been turned into killing machines. So we're going to find out. My prediction is right.
Oh, the Doomwatch version of a Cyberman.
Yeah, or Cybernaut. British, definitely Cybernauts, I think. So, and remember, Jerry Davis and Kit Pedler, who are the force behind this show, are, of course, the people who created the Cybermen. So
that is true.
This is their milieu. Well, Ben, thank you for joining me.
Oh, sure thing.
And I'm going to go rest my old bones in front of the fire and think about the old days when I was young and dynamic and Listeners, I do hope you'll join us all again next time on Fusion Patrol.
Cheers, you young snappers.
You've been listening to Fusion Patrol, a listener-supported podcast. Find out how you can be a sponsor and get early access to all episodes and more at patreon.com/Fusion Patrol. Come join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter. All episodes are available at FusionPatrol.com. Our music is Fight the Future by Amberwolf. This has been a Lone Locust production.